Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mining Revolution, a turning point in South African history, Part 2. Let's just do a recap quickly, go over a few things. The Mineral Revolution brought about some important economic changes in South Africa. You learnt about the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Well, the Mineral Revolution led to South Africa having their own industrial revolution. Towns and cities grew, factories were built to make the needed machinery and building materials, workshops and small businesses grew to make furniture, clothing, sell food, and provide whatever the people needed. Railways and roads were built to transport people and goods across the country. The economy was no longer just reliant on farming, but on mining and industry too. With the mining industry growing the way it did, there was a shifting in the balance of power. Now remember, we had the Dutch settlers who became the Boers, and we had the British settlers. We also had African tribes. But now all of a sudden South Africa had value, and Britain wanted to be in control. They took over the diamond fields, which we had learnt about previously, and they defeated the African kingdoms. They also fought a war against the Boer republics. This was from 1899 to 1902. It is known as the Boer War in South Africa, and it's known as the Great South African War if you go overseas. The British won. And so by 1902, the whole of South Africa was under British control. In 1910, they united all the colonies to form one country, and they called the country the Union of South Africa. The British wanted to maintain political power, and so only white people could vote. They also wanted to maintain economic power, and so they introduced the 1913 Land Act, putting most of the land under white control. Let's take a quick look at the maps. On the left-hand side, you've got a map from 1860. You should recognize this map from when you started the Mineral Revolution. It shows you that the blue was the British, the orange was the Boers. But if you look at the map from 1910, it is no longer divided into colonies. It became provinces, and all these provinces were owned by the British. So there's quite a change from 1860 to 1910. On the screen in front of you is the old South African flag. This South African flag was developed in 1910. The flag represented the different countries or colonies that had helped form the Union of South Africa. So in the background, you have the orange, the white, and the blue. This was from the Dutch colony. You can also see that the Boer republics were still considered in the flag, even though they no longer had their own colonies, and South Africa was one country. The Union Jack comes from Britain, and so the flag represented the multiple European influences that formed the Union of South Africa. Here is a flag that you should recognize today, because this is the flag that was introduced when South Africa became a democracy in 1994, and we are now known as the Republic of South Africa. The flag doesn't have any other country flags on it. It was completely redone. And instead of having other flags to represent nationalities, we have colors to show the change and reformation of South Africa. The red symbolizes the hardships, the struggles, the fighting to become a democracy. The white represents a cleansing. The black represents the chaos that was once here. The gold symbolizes the richness of the land and our mineral wealth. Green is to show how fertile our land is. So the yellow and the green still deals with the economy of the country. Our minerals, our gold, our diamonds, and our farming and agricultural industry. The blue symbolizes the ocean. Because South Africa is a coastal country, and the Y in the middle symbolizes the merging of nationalities, the unity of people, and that is why South Africa is known as the Rainbow Nation. With the mineral revolution, the industrial revolution of South Africa, and the shifting of power, we had different political movements. In 1902, we had the formation of the political party, the African Political Organization. In 1903, we had the formation of the Transvaal Indian Congress. And in 1912, we had the South African Native National Congress, which later would be called the ANC. In grade 8, you don't really need to know all the details about these parties, but at least now you have an understanding when they were formed. And you will definitely go into more detail of this when you do apartheid in grade 9.
Bombata was born in 1860 and ruled the Amazondi clan of the Zulu people. In 1905, the British colonialists introduced a £1 tax to force Zulus to work on their farms. Bombata refused to pay, so in 1906 British police were sent to collect the money. Bombata killed them and launched a series of successful guerrilla attacks against the British, using the Nkandala forest as a base. In retaliation, the British sent a force armed with machine guns and cannons to battle it out at the Momay Gorge. 4,000 Zulus were killed, 7,000 imprisoned, and 4,000 whipped. Bombata's head was cut off, but mysterious rumours circulated that he had escaped. During the conflict, Mahatma Gandhi was a medic for the British Army. Gandhi said, "This is no war, but a manhunt." 100 years later, DNA taken from a lock of hair did not prove Bombata died in battle, and many believe he lived until 1920 in neighbouring Mozambique. Never forget Bombata the rebel, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Manic Minutes.
Bombata was the chief of a Zulu tribe. The group lived in the Mpanza Valley, a part of the British colony of Natal. The Zulu lived by farming and raising cattle. In the early 1900s, the British colonial government needed strong workers to help run its many farms, sugar plantations, and gold mines. British officials thought that Zulu men could serve as workers. To convince the Zulu to work for them, the British introduced a poll tax. The tax required every Zulu male over the age of 18 to pay £1. The British thought that many Zulu men would decide to work for them to earn money for the tax. However, the new poll tax angered many Zulu. Zulu families were poor, and they already had to pay a tax on their huts. In February 1906, Bombata and his people refused to pay the poll tax. When the Zulu refused to pay the tax, the British took control of Zululand. Bombata and a group of supporters attacked British troops. At first, these attacks were successful, but in April 1906, a British army marched towards Bombata's soldiers. Over several weeks, the Zulu fought the British with traditional weapons. These weapons were no match for the modern weapons of the British. Between 3,000 and 4,000 Zulu, including Bombata, were killed. Although modern forensics has shown that maybe Bombata wasn't killed and managed to flee and live somewhere else.
I do not think that I should apologize.
Truth is never illustrated through the use of violence. This is one of the guiding principles that sits at the core of the illuminated thinking created by the man known to the world as Mahatma, the Great Soul, moral and spiritual teacher, founding father of India. Against the violation of human rights, and even when provoked, he would refuse to denounce his aggressors, ever more convinced that non-violence is the only way to combat violence itself. On the basis of his traumatic experiences in South Africa, Gandhi developed the concept of Satyagraha, that literally means adhering unflinchingly to the truth. As Gandhi saw it, physical force is only used by weak people. Real strength resides in a person's capacity to express their ideals. On the 11th of September 1906, Gandhi publicly proclaimed his philosophy for the first time. Public support was virtually universal. One must never oppose arrest. One must never oppose the law. One must never respond to violence with violence. But one must strive to affirm vigorously the will of the people and uphold religious freedom.
Gandhi's dream of developing a community of Satyagrahis, living a new and simple life in rural surroundings, took final shape on a farm near Johannesburg, named after Tolstoy. In October 1913, hundreds of Indians, men and women with children in their arms, thronged Newcastle to march to Transvaal as a protest against the £3 tax levied on their freedom. They had great faith in their leader, who shared their daily hardships, nursed the sick, and fed the hungry. The soldiers of Satyagraha offered prayers and began the epic march in the name of God. Gandhi was arrested 3 times in 4 days, but the march continued, proclaiming the grim tenacity and the stern determination of the marchers. On the triumphant end of the Satyagraha struggle, Gandhi observed, "Satyagraha is a priceless weapon, and those who wield it are strangers to disappointment or defeat."
In 1913, under the leadership of Gandhi, the first mass political resistance was launched in South Africa. The key sites of resistance were in Natal and the Transvaal. This resistance was popularly known as the Satyagraha campaign or the Indian strike. Well over 20,000 men, women and children engaged in protest action against discriminatory legislation that restricted their economic, social and political mobility. 2 significant issues served as a catalyst to mobilize the Indian community. The first was that marriages done in the Hindu and Muslim faith would no longer be recognized as legal by the government. The second issue was that the government refused to remove the £3 tax that they expected the Indian people to pay.
The first scramble for Africa was when European colonial powers saw a continent that was vast, rich in minerals and land, and very poorly defended, and they rushed in to carve it up and steal the land. The second was during the Cold War, when East and West were locked in a struggle for global domination. That's when the Soviet Union backed Marxist despots all over Africa, and the Americans backed any leader who said that he was in favor of capitalism. The third wave, which is happening right now, is much more benign. It's much more about voluntary exchange, about trade, and about the spread of technology. It's a new kind of scramble for Africa, which, if handled well, Africans can win. The old stereotype of foreigners in Africa is that they're only interested in the minerals and not Africa's people. That's still sometimes true, and there are still a lot of corrupt mineral deals going on in Africa. But much more important now is African people. There'll be more Africans in the world than Chinese people by 2025. It's a huge market, and since they're all living in independent countries, they're in a much better position than in the past to negotiate better deals with the outside world. And this has been great for Africans. Greater openness to trade and investment from the outside world is one of the reasons why Africans are 2/5 richer than they were in 2000. Of course, the fact that there are fewer wars and better macroeconomic policies has also helped. There's still a big problem with corruption. Unaccountable leaders in the less transparent African countries can often sign deals with outsiders that benefit them personally, but perhaps not their countries so much. The things that Russia's doing in the Central African Republic, where you have private firms protecting diamond mines and the president of that war-torn country, are to many people reminiscent of what happened in the 19th century at the height of imperialism. The scale of foreign interest is unprecedented. Between 2010 and 2016, 320 new embassies were opened in Africa, probably the largest embassy building boom anywhere, ever. Turkey alone opened 26. Last year, India announced it was going to open 18. Military links are spreading too. China alone has ties with 45 African countries. America and France are helping defeat terrorists in the Sahel. Oil-rich Arab nations are setting up military bases in the Gulf. And Russia has military deals with 19 African countries. African voters and watchdogs need to insist on more transparency in the way that these deals are done. The kind of work that Kenyan journalists have done to expose scandals connected to a Chinese railway project is very encouraging. Second, African leaders need to think more strategically. China is one country, Africa's 54. It's going to be much harder for them to drive the right kind of bargains if they let China negotiate with them individually behind closed doors. Even if African unity is a bit of a far-off dream at the moment, at least you could see more regional unity, which would be very useful in negotiating infrastructure projects. Finally, Africans should take what some of their new friends tell them with a pinch of salt. The Chinese government is very keen to tell Africans that democracy is a Western idea and that development needs a firm hand. This may be music to the ears of some of the strongmen on the continent, but African voters should not be fooled by it. There's a lot of research out there suggesting that the African countries that are more democratic tend to grow faster and prosper better. As the population gets more educated and moves into the cities more, we're seeing that they're more critical of governments and giving the ruling party a lower share of the vote. As African politics grows more competitive, voters will have more clout, and they'll be able to insist on a form of globalization that works for Africans and foreigners alike.